you're fortunate in some ways, and in other extremely important ways, you earned it. And like you said, not everybody that has these physically genetic gifts gets to go do this because of the thing that's missing here sometimes.
Yeah, we're missing her.
Right. Absolutely. What do you see as the range of effectiveness in NFL strength and conditioning, from absolute silliness to extremely productive programs? Is it really a factor at that level? I think my feeling is that these guys all, like you said earlier, they can already play football.
Yeah.
At the professional level, what is the primary function of the strength and conditioning coach? He interfaces with injury rehab.
He does. He's there to I guess just maintenance. To not get guys injured. And I feel that
they come in with some workout skills that have obviously carried them this far.
Sure.
His ability to facilitate a continuance of that individual process is probably his job, and that's not to direct the team's training like you would see at the high school and probably the college level as well, but to facilitate the individual's training.
Come season.
Is that a reasonable assessment of?
Yes and no. When it comes season time, it's time to play football. I think it's more of a maintenance and conditioning program that they're going to, make sure you're doing your workouts and kind of keep after you to kind of keep that aspect up. I think where the strength coaches really get to shine is in the off season, where all of a sudden they bring in certain people and they're going to, guys are there with their program and they're going to do the conditioning, they're going to do the agility and the running and all this stuff.
So as a team, you guys train in the off season?
Well, a lot of guys get off season workout contracts. Where the coaches said, hey, maybe we'll pay this guy to stay here in the off season to lift weights, because we're not necessarily sure if he's going to do it on his own.
Right.
I was never fortunate enough to get that because they always knew I would go lift weights and come in shape. So
saved some money on you.
So for me, they didn't. So they never paid me. So in a way, I said, well, if you're not going to pay me, I'm going to go live and train where I want. So I never trained anywhere. I never trained with the team in the off season.
Right.
And even though teams were like, oh, that's going to negatively look bad and you're going to struggle, at the end of the day, if you can play, you can play. And the first day showed up, and when I was in shape and everything was great, then they were like, awesome, you did great in your off season.
So there's quite a bit of variability then in terms of the approach to strength and conditioning for each individual athlete.
Sure. And
this is probably, at least my outsider's impression, of one of the primary differences between a college approach and a pro approach.
Sure.
Because colleges have a strength coach that in general will exercise more control over each individual player's
Well, he also
training.
has young guys.
At the pro level, the coach facilitates the individual training that got the guy in the job in the first place.
Yeah, I remember Mike Wysick, who's the strength coach for the Patriots. When I showed up the first day, I was saying he handed me a cart, and it was like legs, or it was lower and upper, and I had like all these choices. I had it was a million choices for legs, a million choices for upper.
Like a Chinese restaurant kind of situation.
And it was interesting. I was going to squat and I was going to bench, and I had to work up to triples on the bench, and so I put my 405 on, and they got real nervous, and they were like, no, we have to have at least 3 spotters, one here, one in the back, one in the front,
really?
When you go over 400 pounds. Because I guess somebody had been injured and they had this huge deal, so I had to wait until we could get a strength coach and 2 other guys to wrangle it up. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I've lifted that weight without spotters for years, and
right.
But it was just kind of interesting. I looked over and they had board presses, so they had a whole bunch of different size boards, and I guess guys had been doing board presses.
Right.
So I know they incorporated some powerlifting stuff, and I spotted chains. So I saw a whole array of different things. The other one was
stuff they had obviously been using at one point.
Well, they had a pretty good amount of the West Side stuff because they had the belt squat in there.
Right.
And I'd seen a bunch of the things. They had kettlebells. The other one that blew me away was they had a room that was as big as, or maybe half the size of the weight room. That was the core room that I walked in, and there was a bunch of guys on Busu balls and doing different things.
The core room.
So whereas I always thought, the best way to stabilize your midsection was to, lift some heavy weights.
Get real damn strong.
Yeah, but I think what you have is you have so many high-level athletes that have so many different. This is what I like. This is what worked for me.
Right.
This is the system I came from. That all of a sudden you put them into this big mix. You're not going to get a round peg in a square hole.
Well, and again, the object primarily is, we hired this guy because he could play football. Don't get him hurt.
Exactly.
Don't get him hurt.
Because
if he doesn't know how to do snatches, it's probably the wrong time to try to teach
exactly.
him.
Because can you imagine if you hurt that guy, if you got this big-time athlete who all of a sudden they put 400 pounds on and he ruptures a pec?
Yeah, I can imagine. I don't think I'd want to be in that position. And I can understand the restrictions that the job places on a strength conditioning coach.
Yeah.
It would frustrate me because of the way I've always operated, but it's it's just the nature of the job is different.
You have different,
the nature of the job is different.
Most of the strength coaches are awesome guys. Jeff Hurd was our strength coach in Kansas City my first couple of years, and he's with the Chargers now. And I'm telling you, Jeff would bend over backwards to put together any type of program that you want. If I said, hey, I want to do nothing but barbell train, I want to do this, and he would come out and design something for you. If I only want to do all machine-based and this is what I want to do, he'd design something for you. So most of these guys are so, they're great guys, but on top of it, they're willing to go out of their way to find whichever you feel works best for you.
Right.
And I'm going to give you
They're versatile.
Yeah.
They're versatile. They're much more versatile than I am.
Whereas if somebody walks into Wichita Falls Athletic Club and they say, hey, I want to do machine preacher curls, leg extensions, and I want to do hack squats on a machine.
I say, I'm sorry we don't have those.
And I will not teach you to use
available, and I'm not interested in watching you do that. So please go down the street. Yeah, that would be my approach. So really, in a situation like that, I couldn't function nearly as well as they can because I'm just not. That's not my gig. The thing that aggravates me, I'm inflexible and rigid, and I don't have a good range of motion either. The thing that aggravates me, though...
Range of emotion or range of motion?
I don't have any emotion.
Okay,
That's widely recognized. But the thing that aggravates me is that just because a strength and conditioning coach is at the professional level, that means that his opinion is regarded as more valuable, especially when it applies to the bottom part of the curve, the development curve, than mine does. By the time you get through operating your gym for another 5 or 6 years, you're going to be in a far better position than I am in terms of having an appreciation for the spectrum of strength and conditioning, because I've primarily concerned myself over the years with teaching novices because I'm a gym owner and I've started these people. You see, I have coached high-level Olympic lifters and high-level power lifters as well, but you have seen the range of what goes on at the very top of that since you played in college. And over the next years of operating your gym and doing seminars and stuff, you're going to be tacking on to that type of experience that I'll never have an opportunity to obtain. The part that takes place at the bottom of the curve, the only part of it really I know well, which is how you take a 35-year-old real estate salesman from sedentary to useful physical specimen. And you're going to be in a much better position within a few years than I will ever have a chance to be.
I disagree in that I think the greatest thing that ever, or probably
you're not allowed to disagree.
the best and the worst thing that ever happened to lifting weights or strength training was the internet. In that it allowed me to meet somebody like you, and for us to actually open dialogue and talk, and through the internet, this whole thing was able to happen. Before 1994, there was really no internet when I went to college. I mean, we had email, but the internet was kind of a new shaky thing.
Yeah.
So before that, when I started lifting weights, where do you think? I mean, it was either Flex magazine. It was I was fortunate to have George to go to and different stuff, my training partners. But it wasn't until I mean, the fact that we had to phone call different people and ask them questions in, the mid 90s. So I look at this and I think, here's this deal where now we're this, kind of internet nation or internet world, and that you can take a
constant, non-stop flow of
information that, you can have a guy who's doing something incredible in Sweden, for example, and you can talk to a guy that's in Northern California who can talk to me in Southern California, and we can all share these ideas. Or the fact that I'm fortunate enough to go out and teach these seminars and to get to work with 25, 30, 50 people at a time, and they get to take whatever I teach them and take it back to their home place and deal with their own players. And I think through that kind of I guess you could call it almost like leaking or saturation or water, this idea of like water overflowing. I think that idea and kind of what you're teaching, I mean, you've done a pretty good job of building a strong contingent of people that really are believing in getting strong and putting on size and getting bigger, and that it really isn't cool to be like I always laugh when these kids are telling me that their goal is to weigh over 200 pounds. And that Mark Rippetoe told them
your
that
skeleton weighs 200 pounds.
Well, that Mark Rippetoe told
your
them,
liver weighs 38 pounds.
That what was it? Mark Rippetoe told this one kid we spotted. I forget his name. The kid from San Diego. What was his name? Home.
Mike Hum. Yeah.
Mike Hum.
Our friend Mike
that
Hum.
he was trying to weigh over 200 pounds because you told him that adult male isn't really
all
adult male.
males weigh over 200. That's absolutely
so
true.
His goal was to weigh
I
over
stand
200.
by that. I stand by that. But the bad part of the internet. The bad part of the internet.
It's the keyboard samurais.
Is the keyboard samurais.
That's what I call
guys that, just by virtue of the fact that they've typed 20,000 posts, are regarded as experts.
Well, what about?
It's amazing, but
I was on a message board, and I had never, I'm not a huge message boards guy. Occasionally I'll post some stuff. I made a comment, and I think I had maybe 6 posts on this message board, and I made a couple comments, and this kid that had 240 posts all of a sudden tried to call me out on barbell training.
Well,
no, and
I have had more. You've only been here 60.
Yeah. So
junior member, senior member.
Obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
So the kid comes and he, basically tries to ask me like, hey, maybe if you knew more, maybe if you lifted weights or done more, you would know what you're talking about.
Right.
And one of the people that posted after him was like, dude, Google John's name, and the fact that he has 6 posts doesn't mean that he's unexperienced with lifting weights. It's the fact that he's probably lifting weights and not posting on the internet.
What a shocking concept.
And then when the kid, then the kid kind of backtracked and was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then I asked him, I said, hey, what kind of numbers? These are mine. And at that point, I think he realized like you shouldn't judge somebody. But that's what people do.
Here's the bad news.
They judge you by the posts.
Bad news for the keyboard samurais. Star does not own a computer and is not interested in learning about the computer. He's never been on the internet. Now, what does that make him?
He must not be an expert.
He's not an expert.
Or the fact that when I was a kid, what about I had the only the strong shall survive.
Strongest shall survive.
Yeah, the strongest shall survive.
Right.
And we had that book.
Right.
And I mean, that's pretty much the foremost training manual.
It started the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's the one that started the whole thing.
And if you look at all of his diet stuff, and we do, for the diet that I prescribe, it's like a Paleolithic diet with dairy that has been around. I remember reading about Vince Garanda and Vince's gym back in the 50s and the 60s, where Arnold and all those guys trained.
Right.
And they ate a Stone Age caveman diet with
3 dozen eggs a day
and
cooked in raw butter
and copious amounts of raw milk.
Right.
And these guys would pack on huge amounts of weight.
Right.
So, like, the diet that I'm prescribing isn't necessarily anything groundbreaking. If 50 years ago, Vince Garanda, who was, you see pictures of Arnold and all these cats are incredible in shape, and and they talk about lifting heavy weights, doing metabolic conditioning and different stuff. So it's the training hasn't really changed. I just think that we just put it in a different package, sexed it up a little, and more importantly, I think people are forgetting that as long as you're lifting weights and you're trying to make a PR every day, I think that's all that really matters.
It works well.
Yeah,
it's worked well for a long time.
Well, when you were first, I remember we were talking about the your linear progression. As I sat back, and I think I told you this, for about the first, I think it was 10 years that I lifted weights, every day we worked up to a 1 RM.
Right.
And in a way, I did my own linear progression in that every single day I walked in and I maxed out on whatever our core lift was that day.
Right.
We would work up to a 1 RM. And I got stronger every day. I lifted for years. And then at some point it was like, and it stopped. And then that's when we ended up kind of going to the West Side Conjugate method.
Right.
And then when we mixed that with the Olympic lifting and the sprinting, that's when all of a sudden I saw this like incredible system kind of come together that we ended up using for years.
Isn't it fascinating that if you ask your body for the adaptation, that you'll get it?
Well, you have to give it the right building blocks.
If you give it the ability to recover,
Yeah,
but
recover and
you can't. You have to obviously apply the stress and make that stress increase, and then get recovered from the stress. Tell us about your involvement with the Paleo diet and Paleo brands. I want to know not just about I want to know your explanation of the theoretical basis behind this, but let's talk about the company and let's talk about where it's going.
Okay. So the Paleolithic diet has been around for 2 million years of evolution, as we say. We evolved as a hunter-gatherer people. Eating what you could forage, what you could find, what you could kill, what you could capture. 2 million years ago, things like processed foods and all the stuff that are kind of around us didn't exist. So I'm a huge proponent of evolution. It's not to say I don't believe in God, because I think evolution proves the existence of something greater. But I was always fascinated by dinosaurs. When I was in school, I loved anthropology and I loved paleontology. So the idea when I first understood and really read into evolution and the evolution of the paleo diet, it made such sense to me that if you eat a certain way for 2 million years, and this is what's within our genetic code.
Sure. Long-term adaptation
Yeah.
is been driven by evolution. Sure. And is genetic. Short-term adaptation is what you do with that genotype in the framework of this acute time frame we work with in terms of training. But it all takes place in the context of our genetic history.
So with this paleo diet, which was pretty much meat, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, good fats, and that was about the end of it. And it was pretty similar to how I'd always eaten when I was growing up, just because I knew a lot of grains and a lot of those type of things. One always kind of made me sick to my stomach.
Right.
And I always felt kind of bloated and tired if I ate a bunch of cereals or grains or breads or pastas.
Right.
So when I really understood the paleo diet, I kind of looked at this thing and a light bulb went off, and I really understood about when I was strongest, when I was biggest,
basically.
when I was doing my best, was when I ate closest to this diet naturally.
So what does it not include?
Anything that would be pretty much that didn't exist 10,000 years ago.
Right.
So processed grains didn't really come into about 10,000 years ago. They call those Neolithic grains. Mm-hmm. And people are going to say, well, didn't those plants exist years ago? Well, they did, but we didn't have a way of eating.
But not in the concentrated quantities that are available under farming production.
Yeah, rice, wheat, corn, glutens, packaged foods.
Glutens are a big buzzword in this.
It's because our bodies are allergic to them.
And glutens are what?
Wheat, rye, barley.
Well, they're proteins found in those grains.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what gluten is. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's a protein.
It's a protein found in those grains. What about sugar? That's obviously not something that we've been adapted to.
Well, you think about processed sugars. Not really.
Right.
I mean, because we would have never had them in the concentrated form. The only real sugar that we would have had would have been in the form of fruit.
In fruit, or in the occasional honey cache that. Sure. Which
would be pretty.
Which was an occasional thing, and
would be pretty hard to get.
Would have been difficult to obtain under normal circumstances.
Think about even if you've ever seen like honeybees and you've seen a comb. The honey is a processed version. Like to go eat the physical honeycomb,
right,
would be much different than eating the processed honey.
Right.
So if you can look at it and say, hey, as a modern hunter and gatherer, if I was 12,000 years ago, which of this stuff wouldn't be here? There'd probably be an animal running. There'd probably be something growing. There'd probably be something I could pick from the ground.
So if you just think about it a little bit, it's not a difficult set of decisions to make about your diet. So
Sure.
So you go to the store and you buy things that exclude these types of items.
Sure.
And assemble them into a diet. Now, the paleo diet is different from the zone in what specific way? The zone's another
The zone
type of popular diet now.
Well, Zone's a very serious creation, and if you read, the original Zone book, Enter the Zone, Dr. Sears actually promotes a Paleolithic diet and references Lauren Cordain, who is the guy who wrote the book, The Paleo Diet, and he talks about the balancing of macronutrients and 40, 30, 30 proteins, carbs, and fats.
Right.
For me, the Zone diet was always way too many carbohydrates.
Me too.
It just
I just don't like to eat
when I
that way.
zoned out my food, it just didn't work. I always ate a lot more proteins and fats.
Right.
And when we sat down and looked at the way that the Paleolithic diet would zone out into proportions, it was very, very similar to how I'd always eat.
Right.
And I, at the end of the day, I always like to eat meat, and I really always like fruits and vegetables. I mean, it's kind of funny if, from the time I was a little kid, if you gave me two options, like, hey, this big plate of spaghetti or a big steak and broccoli, I would always choose a steak.
Right. I was the same way growing up. It's just,
my niece is too, and her favorite word is meat. She constantly, like, whenever we barbecue or cook, it's like meat, 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 and she sits down, and the first thing she'll eat all the meat off her plate, or I'll pick her up, and when we're barbecuing, we put it in, she loves it.
Yeah.
And so, there's a 2-year-old little girl, and instinctually knows nothing, but just knows
that that's good for her.
This is good, and this is what I like.
Right.
And I much rather, like, you hand her a cookie and she hands it back, and she'll be like, meat, and it's pretty awesome. That's why, I'll tell you, she's a great squat. We bring her to the gym, and man, her squat is money. I wish I squatted as well as she did. So like, we always laugh. Like, Max is funny. He's always like, man, Alex is going to be an incredible Olympic lifter. Did you see that squat? And we always get her to do it. Put her hands over her head, and she'll squat down and do little overhead squats. But what's killer? I was going to say about our gym, at least, is we have a kid area, or what we call our kid storage, where they come and you can store your kid, and the kids can hang out and play while their parents work out. But think about these kids that come in at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they're there, and they get to see their parents, one on platforms, on rings, and we have a huge adult jungle gym. And they get to see, the kettlebells and all the stuff that we do with, different movements, and the kids come out and they play, and they do things like burpees, and they try to row, and they love to swing on the rings and all that type of stuff. And I always kind of think, like, what an incredible deal when all of a sudden, what a great exposure that all these kids had. I was fortunate to train in the garage when I was 14, but we weren't in a place like that when I was 3.
right.
So I think 20 years from now
Would have been fun, wouldn't it?
would have been fun. But can you imagine 20 years from now, those kids growing up in that environment where they're going to be?
Where they think that's normal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We're like things
Completely
like
different set of perceptions about what play is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Martins, Brand X, I saw them in an Olympic lifting competition over at UC Riverside last weekend. And the one, Jeff's I think it's his oldest son, Connor, cleaned 250 pounds.
It's an amazing family.
Yeah.
Great bunch of people.
That kid's 18 years old.
Kids
and, his son was, the other son was there lifting weights. And I see these kids, and they're out there, really embracing, and I'm always in awe. I always, so into them, and just what they're doing. I love it. So we're going to go down there and hang out with them a bunch, and really try to understand what they're doing with their kids.
Well, let's talk again about. Let me say, corral you back into. Tell me about the company.